I never expected family to be the ones to cut me down the most. Growing up, I thought we were close, that the bond we shared was unbreakable. But that all changed the day of the family meeting. It was a cold, rainy evening when the invitation came in. My mom, who never bothered to keep things from me, had sent the message with a hint of urgency. "Come, we need to talk about the family." I knew it had something to do with the business, but I didn't know what. When I arrived, the house was quieter than usual. The living room, which once echoed with laughter and stories from our past, now felt stale, cold even. The family sat around the big wooden table, all of them in their usual places. My uncle, who I had looked up to for years, was seated at the head, and my cousins were positioned next to him. They greeted me with stiff smiles, but there was a distance between us that wasn't there before. I could feel their eyes on me, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't know it at the time, but this was going to be the day that would change everything. The meeting began with small talk, just the usual stuff: who's been doing well, who's struggling, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Everyone was looking at me as if I had done something wrong, but no one was saying it directly. Then, my uncle started speaking, his voice casual, but heavy with a tone that made my heart race. He talked about family expectations, how everyone had to pull their weight in the business. I had always been a part of the family business, helping when I could, but lately my financial situation had been tight. I had been trying to keep it together, working long hours, but there was always something that seemed to slip through the cracks. It was then that my cousin Amanda, who had always been a bit too quick with her judgments, spoke up. She told everyone that I had been freeloading for too long, that I had been given too many chances, and hadn't pulled my weight. Her words felt like a slap to the face, and suddenly, all the gazes around the table turned into knives. She said I wasn't really trying to make something of myself, that I was relying on everyone else's hard work. The room went silent, and I felt the weight of their disappointment crushing me. I tried to explain. I wanted to tell them that I had been working hard, that my struggle wasn't because of laziness, but the words caught in my throat. I could see it in their eyes. My family had already made up their minds. They didn't care about my story, my struggles. All they saw was a person who wasn't living up to their expectations, someone who couldn't keep up with their fast-paced, wealthy lifestyle. The worst part wasn't their words. It was the realization that they had never truly seen me. All these years of working my hardest, all my efforts to help with the family business, were just forgotten. They had only ever seen me as the one who couldn't quite make it. And now, in front of the people I once thought I could count on, I was being called poor, a failure. I stood there, trying to hold my ground, but the words had already been spoken. My family had already labeled me, and it felt like there was no way to take it back. The rest of the meeting went on, but I barely heard anything after that. I was numb. When it ended, I walked out into the cold, empty night, the rain still falling in heavy sheets. My mind raced, and all I could think about was how they had treated me, how I had let them down without even knowing it. I drove home in silence, the weight of their judgment still heavy on my shoulders. But then, as I pulled into my driveway, something shifted inside me. I wasn't done yet. I hadn't failed. I wasn't just some burden to be cast aside. They thought they had me figured out, but they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know what I had been working on, the deal I had been quietly negotiating behind the scenes. That night, as I sat at my desk, staring at the contract on my computer screen, a feeling of determination washed over me. They had made a huge mistake. They had underestimated me, and I wasn't going to let them forget it. I clicked send on the final email, locking in the $1 million deal I had worked so hard for. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I was about to show them that the person they had called poor was about to change everything. I closed the laptop with a firm snap, stood up, and walked over to the window. The rain had stopped, and the moon was beginning to break through the clouds. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't broken. I was stronger than ever, and tomorrow I would make them all see it. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet moments of anticipation. I could feel the weight of the deal hanging over me, but this time, It wasn't something that felt oppressive. Instead, it was empowering. Every document I signed, every agreement that came through, pushed me closer to proving my worth, not just to my family, but to myself. I had always let their voices dictate my self-esteem, always let their opinions shape how I saw myself. But now, I had a different kind of power, the kind that came from my own success, my own hard work, and my ability to stay focused through it all. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I was on the brink of something big while my family still saw me as a failure. But the more I thought about it, the less it mattered. Their opinions were fading into the background, and I was beginning to realize that they had never really mattered. I had spent so much of my life trying to win their approval, trying to prove that I was worthy of being part of their world, but all it had ever done was weigh me down. Now, with this deal, I was going to make them see me in a completely different light, not because I wanted their approval, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't need them to define my success. The days that followed felt like a slow but steady climb. I moved through the motions of life, answering emails, making decisions, and preparing for the next step. But every time I thought about that family meeting, about the way they had dismissed me, I couldn't help but feel a fire ignite within me. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. They had called me poor, weak, and incapable, but soon enough, they would see just how wrong they were. And as the days wore on, the closer I got to my goal. I took long walks in the mornings, clearing my mind and letting the quiet of the world help me focus. There was something calming about the stillness of the early hours, something peaceful about knowing that I had control over my own life. It had been a long time since I had felt this way, since I had felt like I was in charge of my own destiny. The deal I had closed was more than just money. It was a testament to my ability to rise above the expectations that had been thrust upon me. Finally, the day came. The contract was sealed, the money was wired, and the final steps were taken. I had made my first $1 million, not through inheritance or handouts, but through my own determination and grit. It felt surreal, almost impossible to believe. For so long, I had felt like an outsider in my own family, but now, with this achievement, I was about to turn the tables. It wasn't just about the money, it was about showing everyone that I had always been capable, that I had always had the potential, but I had just been waiting for the right moment to unleash it. That evening, I walked into my living room, my mind buzzing with excitement. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long, fear, doubt, insecurity, was gone. In its place, there was nothing but a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've done something great. I had earned this, every penny, every moment of success. And tomorrow, I would walk into that same family meeting, but this time, I wouldn't be the one sitting in silence. I wouldn't be the one hiding behind my insecurities. I would stand tall, ready to show them exactly who I had become. The next morning, I got dressed in my best suit. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the person who had overcome so much to get here. The person who had been knocked down time and time again, only to rise back up stronger. The person who had been underestimated, laughed at, and disregarded, but was now standing on the brink of something bigger than they had ever imagined. When I walked into the room for the family meeting, I felt different. The tension that had once made me shrink, that had once made me feel small, no longer existed. I walked in with a quiet, steady confidence, knowing that I was about to turn their world upside down. As I sat down, my heart beat steady in my chest, but there was no fear this time, only resolve. I didn't waste any time. I pulled out the contract, the paperwork, the details of the deal that had made me a millionaire. I placed them on the table in front of me, one by one, and watched as their faces shifted from confusion to surprise. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to respond. My uncle, the one who had called me lazy and incapable, stared at the documents in front of him, his mouth hanging open. Amanda, who had so quickly labeled me a freeloader, was speechless, her eyes wide as she tried to process the information in front of her. For a moment, the room was silent, the kind of silence that comes when something truly shocking has just happened. Then, without saying a word, I stood up and turned to walk out of the room. As I reached the door, I paused, glancing back at my family who had once made me feel like nothing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply done trying to prove myself to them. I had shown them the truth, and now it was time for me to move on, to build the life I had always deserved. As I left the room, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the victory of a deal closed or the satisfaction of proving them wrong. It was the sense that I had finally stepped into my own power, that I had finally stopped letting the opinions of others dictate my worth. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need their approval anymore. I had everything I needed within me, and that was all that mattered. The days that followed the family meeting were strangely calm. My phone buzzed more than usual, filled with messages from distant relatives, acquaintances, and even some friends, all asking about the deal. Some were curious, others congratulatory, but I noticed the underlying tone of surprise in their words. Nobody had expected this from me, not even me, to be honest. In a way, it was surreal. I had always thought that when this moment finally came, there would be a sense of triumph, of satisfaction. But there was none of that. Instead, there was just a deep sense of quiet contentment, as if I had finally come home to myself after years of searching. I spent the next few weeks focusing on the next steps. The deal was only the beginning. It was a stepping stone, a foundation for what I was truly capable of achieving. I wasn't about to let my success stop at $1 million. The world was full of opportunities, and now, for the first time in my life, I was in a position to take them. The business world was wide open, and I had the knowledge, the skills, and the drive to make it. No longer would I be held back by the judgments of others, by the whispers of doubt and failure that had always clung to me. Now, I could push forward without fear, knowing that my past didn't define me. As the weeks passed, I began to hear from my family more and more. At first, it was the expected calls, apologies, awkward conversations, attempts to make amends. They told me they had known what they had been doing, that they were sorry for pushing me too hard. But their apologies felt hollow. The truth was, they hadn't cared about me or my well-being before, and they certainly didn't care now. They were simply trying to salvage whatever reputation they had left, hoping to gain back the power they had lost when they'd so carelessly dismissed me. One evening, my phone rang. It was my mom. She had been the one I had hoped would understand me, the one who I thought might stand up for me when everything fell apart. I hesitated before answering, my mind swirling with the possibilities. Would this be another attempt at reconciliation? Or was it something else? When I answered, her voice came through softly, almost cautiously. She asked how I was doing, how the deal was going. I told her everything, about the work I was putting in, about the new business ventures I was considering, and about how my life had changed. I told her that I was finally able to breathe without the constant weight of their expectations pressing on me. But when I finished speaking, there was silence on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she was disappointed. She finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. She apologized for how things had turned out, for not seeing the person I had become. She told me that she regretted everything, that she had been blind to my potential. But I didn't want her apologies. I didn't need them. The truth was, my mom had always been the one who had expected me to fix everything for them, to make their lives easier. And now, after all these years, she was realizing that I wasn't the one they could rely on anymore. I was no longer their safety net. I let the conversation end quietly, telling her that I needed to focus on the future and that I was doing well. As the call ended, I felt a strange weight lift off my shoulders. There was no anger, no resentment, just a calm realization that I was done. I had given everything I could to them, but it was time for me to stop living for their approval. I wasn't angry. I was just done. A few days later, I received a message from Amanda. She had reached out after the family meeting to apologize for her harsh words. She admitted that she had been wrong about me, that she had misjudged me. For a moment, I thought about responding, but then I realized that it didn't matter. Her apology wasn't enough. Her words, no matter how sincere they seemed, couldn't erase the years of neglect, of judgment, of treating me like I was nothing. I had spent so many years trying to win her approval, trying to prove my worth. But now I knew the truth. I didn't need her approval. Not anymore. The phone calls from my family didn't stop, but each one felt more distant, less significant. They were all trying to patch up a relationship that had already been broken. They were trying to erase the years of hurt and disappointment with a few words, but I had moved past that. The person they had called poor and useless was no longer sitting at the table, hoping for a scrap of acknowledgement. I had become something more than they ever imagined, and they couldn't take that away from me. As the weeks turned into months, I watched my life transform in ways I had never thought possible. The deals kept coming, the opportunities kept growing, and with every success, I felt more and more detached from my family's world. It wasn't bitterness that I felt. It was freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you realize that you don't need anyone else's validation to succeed. I was building my own path now, and it was leading somewhere far better than I had ever dreamed. But even as I thrived in my new world, a part of me couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if things had been different. If my family had supported me, encouraged me, believed in me, what if they had seen me for who I truly was? But that part of me was quiet now, fading away with each passing day. I was no longer the person they had discarded. I was someone else entirely, strong, independent, and capable of achieving whatever I set my mind to. And then one evening, as I was sitting in my office, I received a message that caught me off guard. It was from Tyler, my cousin, the one person who had always been different, who had never judged me the way the rest of the family had. His message was simple, but it spoke volumes. He said, "I'm proud of you. I always knew you could do it." For a moment, I sat there, staring at the message. And then I smiled. Not because it was validation I needed, but because it was the kind of support I had always wanted from my family. Tyler had seen me for who I was all along, and in that moment, I realized that I didn't need the rest of them to see me. I was already enough. I put my phone down and looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The world felt vast, full of possibilities. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally stepped into the life I was always meant to lead. The journey was far from over, but I knew this. I was never going back to that version of myself that let others define me. I had learned my worth, and I was taking it with me wherever I went. The family that had tried to break me had only made me stronger. And now, I was ready to take on the world. Months passed, and my life continued its transformation. Each day felt like a new chapter, filled with fresh opportunities and experiences that I had once believed were beyond my reach. The success from the million-dollar deal had opened doors I never thought possible. Business partners, investors, and even clients began to approach me with offers, eager to work with someone who had proven themselves. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. But despite the outward success, there was a quiet tension that lingered inside me. I had built a new life, a better life, but the shadows of my past still followed me. The memories of my family, the way they had discarded me without a second thought, still stung. I had moved on in many ways, but the emotional scars were harder to erase. One day, as I sat in my office reviewing contracts, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Vera. The name on the screen made my heart skip, but I didn't hesitate. I opened the message, not knowing what to expect. The words inside were simple, but heavy with meaning. "We need to talk. Please, we've made a mistake." I stared at the message, unsure of how to feel. I had long since stopped caring about their apologies, stopped hoping that they would ever truly understand the pain they had caused me. But this was different. This wasn't just a random text or a casual phone call. This was an attempt at reconciliation, a plea for forgiveness. And for the first time since that fateful meeting, I felt conflicted. I thought back to everything that had happened, everything they had said, the way they had treated me, the hurtful words, the dismissals, the years I had spent trying to prove my worth to them. And then I thought about how far I had come since that moment. I had built a life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them to validate my worth. But still, there was a small part of me that wondered if I could forgive them. I had always been the one to fix things, to make the broken pieces of our family whole. Could I really walk away from that, from the people I had once loved and looked up to? The answer was simple. I had already walked away. And I wasn't going back. I didn't respond to Vera's message right away. Instead, I spent the next few days thinking it over, reflecting on my journey. I had spent too much of my life trying to make them proud, trying to get their approval. But the truth was, I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I had already proven that to myself. The success I had achieved was built on my own strength, my own perseverance. It wasn't about them anymore. And then, one evening, as I was sitting in my new apartment, the phone rang again. This time it was Cullen. His voice, rough and familiar, came through the speaker. He didn't say much at first, just the usual small talk. But then he got to the point. He told me that he had been thinking a lot about what had happened, that he realized he had been wrong. He apologized for how he had treated me, for the way he had kicked me out of the house, for all the years he had taken me for granted. I listened to his words, but they didn't have the same impact on me that they might have once had. His apology didn't undo the years of neglect, the years of trying to please people who would never truly see me. He didn't get to erase the damage he had done with a simple apology. I realized then that it wasn't just about forgiving them, it was about letting go. Letting go of the need for their approval, letting go of the weight they had placed on me, letting go of the idea that I needed them to define who I was. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, the weight of it all settling in. For so long, I had been tied to their expectations, their failures. But now I was free. I was my own person, someone who had built the life, without their help, without their approval. I had earned everything I had, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. The next few weeks passed in a haze of work and self-reflection. I kept my distance from my family, focusing on my business and the future I was building for myself. The deals kept coming, the opportunities kept growing, and with every success, I felt more and more detached from the people I had once called family. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had everything I needed inside me. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message. It was from Tyler, my cousin. He had always been the one person in the family who understood me, who saw beyond the surface. His message was short, but it spoke volumes. "I'm proud of you. I always knew you could do it." Reading his words, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't validation I was seeking. It was the acknowledgement that I had never truly been alone in this journey. Tyler had always seen me for who I was, and that was enough. I didn't need the rest of my family to understand or to approve of my choices. I had the support I needed, and that was all that mattered. The months went by, and I continued to build my business, to expand my network, and to create the life I had always dreamed of. Every step I took felt like a victory, a triumph over the years of struggle and pain. And with each success, I felt more confident, more grounded in the person I had become. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about the freedom I had found, the peace I had created for myself. I had learned that success wasn't just about what you achieved, it was about who you became along the way. And as I sat in my office one evening, looking out at the city skyline, I knew that I had finally become the person I was meant to be. The phone buzzed again, breaking my thoughts. It was a message from Nora, my closest friend, the one person who had never wavered in her support of me.
"You've done it," she said.
"You've finally found your peace." For the first time in a long time, I smiled.
Peace.
That was the word that summed it all up. I had found it, not in the approval of others, but in my own journey. I had built the life, a future, and a sense of self that no one could take away. I had learned that sometimes, walking away from the people who raised you is the only way to become the person you were meant to be. And with that, I knew I was finally free.